Dr. Keith, good to see you, man.
Good to see you, Corey. Looking forward to it as always.
Yeah, this is gonna be another amazing episode of Wit and Wisdom. What we're here to talk about today is actually something really interesting. So we just had our national elections last November, and one of the things that passed here in the state of Colorado was a legalization of mushroom psychedelics in general to be used in for therapeutic purposes. And I find this just absolutely fascinating on all sides, both the actual application of, these substances, these entheogens to the healing process, as well as sort of the larger politics that are surrounding this, which is something that we've talked about in the past. And, really, I think a useful phrase for this is something like the politics of consciousness. I mean, it's interesting to me, right, that certain states of consciousness are sanctioned by the state, and other states of consciousness aren't. And here we are in 2022, and it seems like the tides are turning in a certain kind of sense. We've had, massive political movements across the country to legalize, first marijuana, which is now legal in, I believe the majority of states right now. I have to double check that. But now we're having the legalization of these entheogenic substances in states like Colorado, and it had also passed in 2020 in Oregon. And I feel like this has just absolutely seismic consequences for both the future of, psychotherapy itself. I mean, it's giving an entire new tool set that can be used in a therapeutic setting, as well as just culturally in general, and allowing individuals to have more access to these potentially profound states of experience that a lot of these substances have to offer them. This is one of those times where I'm just really grateful to have Integral, right, the actual framework to help sort of sort all of this out, because there really are so many dimensions to this, right? I mean, we can talk about this through the perspective of the four quadrants. So, these psychedelic substances, they're chemicals. They're actual chemicals that we put into our body, and they have a biochemical reaction in our body, which results in the upper left quadrant in our interior, these different states of experience, these different modes of perception. And in fact, one of the benefits, I think, of these substances is that it actually gets us to more closely examine perception itself, right? Which is
Exactly.
We're constantly perceiving reality at all times, but very rarely are we putting that sort of the mechanisms of our perception under the microscope and actually noticing, like, how is it that my brain is converting light into color and sound into these auditory experiences that we have. And the psychedelic experience kind of gives you it's almost like it slows things down in a certain kind of way, so you can take a look at how you are making sense of your environment at every moment, which is one of the reasons why we have the cliche of, like, looking in a mirror while you're tripping is either nightmare fuel, or it's going to send you off to some heavenly realm, because now it's like I'm looking at how I perceive myself.
Well, what you're saying right now is typical of a conversation somebody would have on acid. It sounds just like you're sounding. Wow, I'm not really seeing that. There's something happening in my brain that's relating to that, but I'm not seeing that. I'm in my brain. Okay, it's like that. I interrupted you. Okay, so but go on.
No, totally fine. And that's what makes it so powerful is, one of the things that we often talk about in conversations like these is sort of this critical mechanism in the upper left that is basically the key to all transformation, right? Whether we're talking about growing up through multiple stages of development, waking up to these sort of spiritual experiences and really, other realms of reality, or the cleaning up process where we are actually sort of surfacing our various shadows and blind spots and allergies and engaging them directly and reintegrating them. The common thread of all of those, the common mechanism with all of those, is subject becomes object. And psychedelics, for a lot of people, it's the very first time they've had sort of a dramatic experience of their subject becoming object, of them being able to look at their conditioning, their habituation, and it's almost like they're able to kind of step outside of their own lives and look from the outside in how they go about making meaning and how they go about relating with other people and relating with the environment. And, and I think that's one of the reasons, Keith, why a lot of people end up having experiences like, I realize that I am not separate from my environment for the first time. That just like revealed itself to me. It becomes self-evident in a certain kind of way when you're in those altered states of consciousness.
Some people, and remember, a sixth of the population does not have an observing ego in multiple situations. And so, aside from paranoid personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder, if you can have a self-observing moment, have a moment where you actually can observe yourself, and particularly observe yourself acting badly,
right?
Which a sixth of the population can't do.
Right.
You just can't do it. If you can have a peak experience of that, potentially that opens up the door to accelerating. Now, accelerating the development of the observing ego of the witness. Has this been researched? Not to my knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And one other thing that I forgot to say, because you're about heading down to the lower left, right?
I'm getting there soon. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of couples will take these drugs together.
Right.
Becky and I have multiple times, mostly without guides. In my experience, I never had guides. Not because I wouldn't have. I probably wouldn't have when I was young, but I would if I was young now. But mostly the couples will take them together. And the interesting thing for me about this is I have never heard a couple say it was a bad experience for us. They always say it was good. There was something about taking the MDMA or the mushrooms or whatever they're doing together, there was something that came out that ultimately in the end left them feeling closer. And I find that fascinating, and I haven't seen any research about that either.
Interesting. So yeah, which brings us into the lower left piece here, where these substances have a huge effect on culture, right? I mean, we actually can see right now how American culture is kind of beginning to shift a little bit, because one of the only state-sanctioned states of consciousness that was available to us was alcohol, right? Yeah, right. And great. I mean, as a result, we sort of became a nation of alcoholics, and there's a lot of
the alcohol is depressant. We have an epidemic of alcoholism, epidemic of depression, not to mention it increases anxiety enormously, which co-varies with depression. So yeah. Oh, you can do that, or you can have cigarettes, which will kill you young too. So hey, go for it. Right. But other kinds of drugs that might enhance your life, that might cause you to become a wiser person, or might wake you up, or might help you grow up, clean up. Well, but again, that was the war on drugs, the war on essentially the progressive postmodernists, and a war on minorities.
That's right. Which brings us into the lower right quadrant, where we can actually find what we're talking about, the politics of consciousness itself. Mm-hmm. I mean, Keith, you mentioned that a lot of these substances were sort of ingrained in the culture of a lot of early societies and a lot of early cultures.
All of them except Eskimos.
Across the board, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of these are magenta and red cultures, right? That have these sort of rites of passage in these a particular sort of, almost a methodology of how to, have these experiences. They're not just, walking around dropping peyote, and there's a whole sequence of events that's very structured in a certain kind of way in order.
The drugs had spirit. The drugs were spirits. Right. The relationship with the drug, and this is by how I learned it. Like when you do I guess I was taught by shamanic people. You're having a relationship with it. It has its own vibe. Like somebody told me, mushrooms like to be in warm, comfortable, dark places. Which is where I wanted to do on mushrooms. When you're talking to the peyote, it was like that. It felt like there was a specific spirit of the substance that was coming through, affecting you and liberating you into the other world.
Right. Well, and this might be one of the reasons, Keith, why these substances often are so effective in therapy, because it's almost like, with my friend, for example, dealing with addiction. Mm-hmm. When you can actually use a substance to confront these addictions that we have in our system, right? Which is sort of feels ironic, as you're using drugs to sort of get out of your dependency with drugs.
Yeah, AA like an irony there. AA really hates using drugs.
Yeah.
Addiction.
But really what it comes down to is what you're doing is you're using structured state experiences so that you are no longer addicted to these completely unstructured, chaotic, impulsive state experiences that we've become addicted to. And this, I think one of the reasons why they're so effective, Keith, is because when we're having these experiences, it's like the meaning reveals itself from the inside out. Right?
Mm-hmm.
You're not subscribing to like someone else's addiction program, for example. You are experiencing this from the inside out. And that irrevocably changes how we make meaning in our lives to begin with. So when I think about how that applies to the politics of consciousness, well, here we have these substances that are evoking what many people will describe as religious experiences, right? I took this chemical and I met God for the first time in my life. And it wasn't just a concept, it wasn't just an idea, like I was sitting in front of God and maybe I was even one with God, right? I mean, whatever it might be, there's a whole series of these experiences. So when you take the perspective of religious institutions, are they going to sanction these kinds of experiences? No, because the only way to God is through them, right? So at the amber stage, we start seeing this constriction in terms of what kind of sanctioning is being extended to these different substances and these different states of consciousness that are associated with those substances. So that's kind of the amber piece, as well as all the ethnocentrism that you mentioned with the drug war and, and I mentioned with reefer madness and like really, kind of trying to peg these, perceived pathologies onto a certain groups of people, in this case, mainly, Black Americans, particularly in the jazz scene. So that's sort of the amber piece of the politics of consciousness. But then we have the orange piece, which you also mentioned, which is like, we have a massive, like, trillion-dollar global pharmaceutical industry. And I'm not one of these guys to be like, we should always, big pharma's the devil and all that. Well, they can be. They can also be. Yeah.
They're the devil. Big Pharma is the devil.
I'm going to back up. I've got a kid with health issues, and like, thank God for the medicines that are available in the 21st century for dealing.
Well, that's true.
For helping people who really need them. Big pharma in a lot of ways saved my daughter's life and continues to save my daughter's life with the types of chemicals that they're making available, for healing. So I'm not black and white with this whatsoever, but I will say that when it comes to, again, extending sanction to different kind of compounds and different kind of healing modalities that you cannot directly profit from, of course that creates a constriction. So the orange piece of the politics of consciousness is basically, we don't want people to have access to chemicals that we can't profit from, because I can't patent a mushroom or a plant. Right? I can maybe patent like some extraction process that we do with it, but like, you don't need that for these chemicals. With weed, you're literally taking flowers off a plant and smoking it. With mushrooms, you're picking it off of cow shit and putting it in your mouth and meeting God. I mean, it's so direct, that you can't, there's no intermediaries anymore for that process. And that is a big problem for orange. And then we get to green, where it's just like, green is automatically going to hate orange. It's automatically going to hate amber. It's automatically going to think, it's going to see nothing but this kind of corruption in the politics of consciousness. And they're going to take sort of a equal but opposite reaction in the other end, where it's just like, let's just legalize everything, guys. Let's just like,
let's all take acid.
Tune in, drop out,
Everybody should tune in, drop out. Well, no, we're different types of people, Green.
That's right.
Some types of people, they take acid and they go psychotic.
That's right.
One of my friends once took a drug called STP that was, I think it was STP, that was taken from belladonna, which is from a flower, which is, you stay high for 2 days on this. So he took the drug, and then an hour later, he was arrested and spent 2 days in jail on this thing. And also, one of the things, I think secretly, because I was raised by scientists, I was kind of orange. Like, I took a bunch of acid once and heard a eucalyptus tree singing to me, and I can still hear it. It was beautiful, low, deep voice. And the same night, seeing the ocean coming up to the edge of a cliff with stars, green and red stars bursting in the sky. I always thought it was kind of the drug. It wasn't until years later I realized that's not just the drug. It's you having an experience with the ocean and the sky and the tree that is a deeper experience than you were having before. And there was an alignment there that wasn't there before, which is now this is where green shifts into teal.
That's right.
So then how does that inform you? How does that inform you on your path? And we don't want to overpromise. If you have an inability to have proportionate emotions, or an inability to trust people, or an inability to honor agreements, or an inability to see other people as equals, you're not going to get that ability taking psychedelics. You might have a moment of insight about how I'm fucking everything up with this thing, and you might not. But after that, that would require an enormous amount of personal work to install the capacities that you don't have.
Right.
So there's no drug that installs capacities, but there's drugs that give you an opportunity to decide to install something.
Right. Right.
And so this is how they work together.
That's right. Yeah, I feel like the integral move, Keith, is, among sort of the all the framing that we've tried to establish in this episode, but another big part of it is, it's almost like every human being has a cosmic address, but so does every one of these different substances, right? Like cocaine has a very different effect on the personality, on the ego, on the self than psilocybin does. And integral gives us a language to be able to sort of, here's the actual effects that a drug, the interior effects that a drug is having. These drugs are really going to reinforce and emphasize your frontal self. I mean, that's like kind of what cocaine sort of is. It's just like your personality, just like, blah, here I am, right? Whereas,
but it also affects your mood. The most common drug prescribed for depression in the 50s was methamphetamine.
Right.
Now, this has caused a lot of us to go, so we want to be a little bit cautious with the new drugs.
That's right.
But luckily for us, we have 70 years of experience with psilocybin, LSD, not quite so much with ketamine, not quite so much with DMT. So we know so far that they're safe. We know that unless you're already starting out with a fragile psychology, they don't cause long-term damage at the least, and at the most, they help you grow if you want to grow.
Finally, we've got a comment on YouTube I wanted to read from Dorothy, who says, in my experience, it's not about needing to take shrooms over and over, but to have an experience and have it entrain you to expand your normal consciousness to appreciate all of life every day. That really resonates with Alex Gray. When Alex Gray talks about this, he's done a few conversations with Ken, and Alex Gray is sort of our resident altered statesman in a lot of ways. He has
pretty good.
He has chronicled these realms in exhausting detail. And when he talks to Ken about it, he says the exact same thing. He's like, look, you can use the chemical to have a peak experience, but remember that is a peak experience. It's giving you a momentary look behind the curtain, right? But as Ken says, and as Ken got from his own spiritual teacher when he was young, if your experience does not persist through waking life, dreaming life, and deep sleep, it's not real enlightenment. It's not a real awakening. And I think that, in this context, we can see how, these peak experiences can let us know, if anything, that this is possible, for enlightenment is possible in this lifetime. That's a really big deal for people to learn for the first time. Like, these states of consciousness are possible, but the drug alone, at least according to Alex and Ken, and I'm guessing you and me too,
absolutely,
the drug alone is not going to bring you there and turn that temporary state into a permanent trait. Instead, what we need to do is have these peak experiences. That's great. But then there's a number of contemplative practices that we can engage in every single day that makes this more and more real for us as we go. So we have our big, wonderful breakthrough/breakdown experiences. What do you do next? You sit on a cushion and you meditate. You look at your own mind, right? And that's how we're able to sustain sort of, some of the beautiful kind of spiritual realizations and unfoldings and, all of that understandings that we've gotten from that altered state experience.